When audiences first saw Irene Ryan on television, her name might not have immediately stuck, but her character certainly did. As Granny on the Beverly Hillbillies, she became one of the most beloved TV matriarchs in history. With her sharp wit, boundless energy, and unforgettable comedic timing, Irene created a role that made millions laugh week after week. To the world, she was full of life, sass, and spirit. But behind the bright lights of Hollywood, Irene's own journey was filled with both triumph and tragedy. From her early start in vaudeville to her career-defining role on television, Irene Ryan's life was one of resilience and dedication to her craft. Yet her story ended far sooner than it should have, leaving fans devastated by the loss of the woman who made them smile for years. Today we look back at the incredible life and tragic end of Irene Ryan, a story that reminds us that even the brightest stars carry struggles the world never sees. Irene Ryan's story began far from the glamour of Hollywood. She was born on October 17, 1902, in El Paso, Texas, into a world that was still finding its rhythm at the turn of the century. Her parents were hard-working but modest, and nothing in her early years suggested that she would one day become a beloved face in American households. Yet even as a child, Irene carried something special within her, a spark of energy and a natural gift for entertaining that couldn't be hidden. As a young girl, she loved to sing, dance, and make people laugh. Family and neighbors noticed her charm early on, describing her as a lively child who was never afraid to take center stage at gatherings. For Irene, performance wasn't just fun, it was a calling. She felt at home in front of an audience, whether it was small or large. That fearless spirit would become her greatest strength as she carved a path into show business. Her first real break came as a teenager when she began performing in local talent shows. These small opportunities gave her the chance to test her abilities and grow her confidence. But Irene wanted more. In an era when entertainment was shifting rapidly, from vaudeville stages to radio, and eventually to motion pictures, she knew she had to be bold if she wanted to make it. By the time she was in her late teens, Irene had already set her sights on a life in entertainment. At just 20 years old, she married fellow actor and comedian Tim Ryan. Together, they formed a vaudeville act called Tim and Irene. The duo specialized in quick comedy, witty banter, and slapstick routines that made them a hit on the vaudeville circuit. They toured tirelessly across the United States, performing for audiences who were eager for lighthearted entertainment during difficult times. The 1920s and 1930s were not easy years for entertainers. The Great Depression hit America hard, and many performers struggled to survive. Irene and Tim were no exception, but they pushed through, relying on their creativity and determination. Their act became popular enough to secure them regular gigs, and soon they were being booked in theaters from coast to coast. For Irene, the vaudeville years were grueling but invaluable. They taught her discipline, comedic timing, and the importance of connecting with an audience, skills that would later make her unforgettable on television. In addition to live performances, Irene and Tim transitioned into radio, which was becoming the dominant form of entertainment in American homes. Their voices carried across the airwaves, and the Tim and Irene act reached a new level of recognition. For a woman who had grown up in Texas with little more than determination, Irene was proving that she could stand alongside the best in the business. Still, life on the road was not always glamorous. The constant travel wore on their marriage, and after years of performing together, Irene and Tim eventually divorced in 1942. It was a difficult chapter in her personal life, but it did not stop Irene from continuing her career. She had found her identity as a performer, and she refused to let personal setbacks derail her dreams. In the years that followed, Irene pursued solo opportunities in film and stage. She appeared in short comedies and supporting roles in Hollywood productions, slowly building her name beyond vaudeville. Though she never achieved leading lady status in the movies, her versatility and comedic instincts kept her working steadily. What mattered most was that she never gave up. Every stage, every role, every performance was another chance to prove herself. By the late 1950s, Irene Ryan had spent decades in entertainment. She had weathered the highs and lows of vaudeville, survived the instability of radio, and found work in Hollywood films. Most would have considered it a full career already. But for Irene, her greatest role was still waiting, a role that would transform her from a respected performer into a national treasure. To millions of television viewers, Irene Ryan will forever be remembered as Granny Clampett, the sharp-witted, feisty matriarch from the Beverly Hillbillies. Her humor was so natural, so convincing, that fans often assumed she must be the same in real life. But behind the laughter and the energetic on-screen persona was a woman whose private life was far different from the character she played. Born Jessie Irene Noblitt in San Francisco in 1902, she grew up in a modest working-class family. From a young age, Irene possessed a vibrant spirit and a natural gift for entertaining. She would sing, dance, and perform little comedy routines at school functions, often making her classmates laugh. But her upbringing was not glamorous. Money was scarce, and her early years were shaped by the struggles of a family trying to make ends meet. Those humble beginnings gave her resilience, but they also meant she had to fight harder than most to find her place in show business. Irene began her career in vaudeville, which was a grueling training ground for performers in the early 20th century. It demanded versatility. Actors had to sing, dance, act, and improvise all within a single performance. In her late teens, Irene married vaudeville performer Tim Ryan, and together they developed a comedy act. Billed as Tim and Irene, the pair performed around the country and eventually found work in Hollywood, even appearing in a string of short comedy films during the 1930s and 1940s. Yet, as often happens in the entertainment industry, professional success came at the expense of personal happiness. The demands of touring, the financial uncertainties, and the competitive nature of Hollywood all weighed heavily on their marriage. After nearly 2 decades together, Irene and Tim divorced in 1942. Though they continued to work together on occasion, the bond between them had been broken. Irene never remarried, and from that point on, her life was devoted almost entirely to her career. Behind her radiant smile, Irene often carried the weight of loneliness. Friends recalled that she was deeply private, rarely speaking about her personal life, and she poured herself into her work to fill the emptiness left by the end of her marriage. She longed for stability and companionship, but seemed to accept that her destiny was to belong to the stage and screen rather than to a family of her own. By the 1950s, Irene was working steadily but quietly, often appearing on stage and in supporting roles on television. While she was respected as a seasoned professional, the spotlight never seemed to shine fully on her. For many actresses, this would have been the end of the road. Hollywood, after all, was notorious for discarding older women, but Irene's determination never faltered. She kept auditioning, kept working, and refused to let her age stop her from pursuing her dreams. Then came 1962, the year everything changed. Irene auditioned for a new CBS sitcom called The Beverly Hillbillies. The role of Granny Clampett required a fiery personality, comic timing, and a believable country spirit. Despite being in her 60s at the time, Irene's energy in the audition room stunned the producers. She didn't just play Granny, she was Granny. With her piercing voice, expressive face, and impeccable timing, Irene transformed into the heart of the show, almost overnight. Irene Ryan went from being a hard-working but little-known actress to one of the most beloved faces on television. The Beverly Hillbillies became a massive hit, consistently ranking at the top of the ratings. Viewers adored Granny's tough love, her quick wit, and her relentless belief in old-fashioned remedies and mountain wisdom. The role earned Irene 2 Emmy nominations and made her a household name. But success did not come without a price. The grueling filming schedule of the show left her physically drained. The energy she displayed on screen was often exhausting to maintain, especially as she grew older. Friends later admitted that Irene sometimes felt trapped by the very role that had brought her fame. Audiences expected her to always be Granny, forgetting that behind the character was a sensitive, aging woman who longed for rest. Still, Irene remained professional, never complaining publicly and always delivering her best performance. She cherished the connection she had with fans and was grateful for the recognition that had taken decades to achieve. But in her private moments, she often reflected on what she had sacrificed to reach that point: love, stability, and personal peace. By the late 1960s, Irene Ryan was a star, but she was also a woman carrying the invisible weight of a lifetime of struggles. To the world, she was the hilarious Granny Clampett. But in truth, she was Jessie Irene Noblett, a woman who had fought through heartbreak, loneliness, and disappointment just to earn her place in Hollywood history. By the early 1970s, Irene Ryan was still enjoying the rewards of her late-blooming fame. The Beverly Hillbillies had cemented her place in television history, and she was cherished by audiences of all ages. Yet behind the public image of a vibrant comedic powerhouse, Irene was quietly beginning to face a far more difficult and personal struggle: her health. When the Beverly Hillbillies came to an end in 1971, after 9 successful seasons, Irene was in her late 60s. While many of her co-stars sought new projects, Irene felt the toll of age and years of non-stop work catching up with her. She had spent decades pouring her energy into performing, often ignoring small warning signs in her body. Friends noticed she seemed more tired than usual and occasionally short of breath, but Irene, who had always been tough and resilient, brushed it off. Instead of retiring, Irene turned to the stage. In 1972, she joined the Broadway cast of the musical Pippin, playing the role of Berthe, the grandmother. The part was physically demanding, requiring her to sing, dance, and maintain high energy throughout each performance. Despite her age and lingering fatigue, Irene threw herself into the role with her trademark dedication. Critics praised her, and audiences loved seeing her in a new light. But behind the curtain, she was suffering. Not long into her run with Pippin, Irene collapsed during a performance. At first, it was dismissed as exhaustion. After all, Broadway schedules were relentless, and even younger performers often struggled to keep up. But Irene's collapse was not just a moment of fatigue. It was the beginning of something far more serious. Doctors soon diagnosed her with a malignant brain tumor, and to make matters worse, she was also suffering from heart disease. The combination of illnesses was devastating. At a time when medical treatments were far less advanced than they are today, her options were limited. For Irene, who had spent her life being strong, independent, and determined, the news was a crushing blow. Still, Irene tried to remain optimistic, at least outwardly. She rarely spoke about her illness to the public, preferring to keep her struggles private. To those who knew her, it was another example of her professionalism. She never wanted to burden others with her pain, nor did she want her fans to see her as weak. She had always been admired for her energy, and she wanted to maintain that image for as long as possible. But the truth was unavoidable. Her condition quickly worsened, leaving her weaker with each passing month. She had to step away from performing, something that broke her heart. Acting had always been her escape from loneliness and hardship. And now, just as she had finally reached the pinnacle of success, her body was betraying her. In her final months, Irene leaned on the support of close friends and family. Those who visited her recalled that she never lost her humor, even in the face of unbearable suffering. She would crack jokes and lighten the mood, determined not to let her illness define her completely. But when she was alone, the toll was evident. For a woman who had lived her life through characters and comedy, confronting mortality was especially difficult. In March 1973, Irene Ryan passed away at the age of 70. Her death shocked her fans, many of whom had no idea she had been ill. To them, she had always been Granny Clampett, the feisty, indestructible woman who could take on the world. The reality that Irene had been quietly fighting a losing battle made her passing even more heartbreaking. Her death was not just the end of a beloved actress's life, but the closing chapter of a long journey, filled with sacrifice, resilience, and an unrelenting commitment to her craft. She had worked tirelessly for decades, endured heartbreak, and faced loneliness, only to finally taste fame late in life, only to have it all taken away by illness. For her fans, the loss was deeply personal. They mourned not just the actress, but the character who had made them laugh, who had reminded them of their own strong-willed grandmothers, and who had embodied the warmth and humor of an older generation. For Irene, however, her final days were a bittersweet reflection of a life spent giving everything to her art, with little left for herself in the end. When Irene Ryan passed away in 1973, Hollywood lost not only a talented performer, but also a woman whose life was defined by resilience, sacrifice, and an unwavering dedication to her craft. For many fans, it was difficult to separate the actress from the role that had made her famous, Granny Clampett of the Beverly Hillbillies. Even decades after her passing, viewers still recall her sharp one-liners, her fiery temper, and her quirky remedies as though Granny were a real person they once knew. Yet the legacy Irene left behind is more than just a beloved character. It is a reminder of the human struggles behind the laughter. Her rise to fame was, in many ways, bittersweet. Unlike many of her peers who achieved recognition early in life, Irene had to wait until her 60s to become a household name. By then, she had endured years of hardship, failed relationships, a career spent in the shadows, and the loneliness of living without a family of her own. When the Beverly Hillbillies finally gave her the success she had long dreamed of, she embraced it wholeheartedly. But the cruel irony was that she would not live long enough to fully enjoy the rewards of her hard work. Even so, her time on the Beverly Hillbillies remains a lasting treasure in television history. The show itself was often dismissed by critics as simple rural comedy, but audiences adored it. At its peak, it was one of the highest-rated programs in America. And Irene's portrayal of Granny was a central reason for its success. The character embodied strength, humor, and an old-fashioned kind of wisdom that resonated with viewers. Many saw Granny as a reflection of their own mothers or grandmothers, tough, practical, and full of heart. Through this role, Irene connected with people on a deeply personal level, leaving an impression that continues to endure. In the years following her death, Irene's contributions were honored in a variety of ways. She was posthumously remembered not just as Granny, but also as a hard-working actress who never gave up, even when the odds were against her. In 1973, the Irene Ryan Acting Scholarship was established through the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival, funded by her estate. To this day, the scholarship continues to support young performers, ensuring that her legacy inspires future generations of actors. This gesture, born out of Irene's own struggles to make it in a difficult industry, has helped countless students pursue their dreams. But Irene's story is also remembered with sadness. Many reflect on the fact that her greatest achievements came so late in life, and just as she reached the peak of her career, illness cut her journey short. The tragedy of her early death at 70 underscores how fleeting success can be and how often it arrives when time is already slipping away. In this way, her life has become a symbol of both the rewards and the cruel realities of show business. Despite the sorrow of her final chapter, Irene Ryan's memory lives on every time a new generation discovers the Beverly Hillbillies. Reruns continue to bring her performance to life, and fans young and old find joy in her timeless comedy. While she may have felt loneliness in her private life, in the public imagination she remains surrounded by love and admiration. Her laughter, energy, and spirit continue to echo decades after her passing. Ultimately, Irene Ryan's legacy is one of inspiration. She proved that success can come at any age, that perseverance matters more than youth, and that laughter has the power to make people feel connected even across generations. Though her life ended in tragedy, her work continues to bring joy to millions. And while the world remembers her as Granny Clampett, those who look closer see the story of Jessie Irene Noblett, a woman who gave everything to her art, and in doing so, left behind a legacy of laughter wrapped in sadness.